Well, thank you everybody for coming here today. It's good to see all of you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest today. Miyoko Hikaji is a Cedar Rapids native and served in the active duty Army from 1995 to 1998. She returned home after completing her initial enlistment, joined a transportation unit in the Iowa National Guard, and began her studies in journalism and psychology at Iowa State University. After September 11, 2001, Miyoko was mobilized for the Force Protection Security Team at Camp Dodge for 6 months. She resumed her studies afterward, but was mobilized again in 2003 and deployed for over a year in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Miyoko earned 2 BS degrees from Iowa State University in 2004, journalism and mass communication, with a public relations emphasis, and psychology. Her memoir, titled All I Could Be, My Story as a Woman Warrior in Iraq, is scheduled for publication and should be out by the end of this month. Miyoko is a passionate veterans advocate and takes special interest in supporting and mentoring veterans through the transition period after deployment. She is outspoken on the present issues of military sexual trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide. Miyoko believes that veterans should educate the uninformed public by sharing their experience in any number of art forms, and that all military-connected persons have a story to tell. Miyoko's husband also works in Veterans Affairs for the Department of Education, and together they have 2 beautiful children. She is a veteran, citizen, mother, and author, and I feel very fortunate to be able to call her a friend. I appreciate Miyoko's continued leadership and courage in sharing her own story, and it's sincerely an honor and privilege for me to introduce Miyoko to all of you.
I want to make sure this is working. Good? Okay. Well, it's an honor to be here today, to stand here at my old school. I had the chance last weekend to teach at a writer's workshop at the University of Iowa, and twice I was called a member of the faculty and ma'am. So I guess I realized I'm beyond being looked at as a student now. I'm not sure if I always like that, but it's good to be here. For the women veterans who are here today, I want to especially say thank you for your service. I know it's something that is often overlooked, and it's sort of an invisible service. We aren't very easily identified, so I think a lot of times you miss out on that chance to be thanked and appreciated. And I want you to know that you have earned and deserve the continued respect and gratitude of your country, of your service branch. Not sure what's making my mic do that. Of your family, of your fellow sisters in arms. So each and every one of us, we thank you. And I also want to thank the women that joined me earlier today for coming out, because they recognized that they deserved to be thanked. And sometimes we forget that about ourselves. We don't always go out and seek it. So you carved out the time and the space to receive the gift. And I wouldn't be able to say thank you if you weren't all here today. So for the veterans in the audience, I want you to feel uplifted today, encouraged. I want you to leave the space with a spark that makes you look back on your service time and find new potential and increased value in it. I want you to dig deep in order to realize that not only did you do something that a great majority of the population has very little intimate knowledge of, but that your individual story, alongside the story of every veteran, is together the legacy that we pass on to a new generation of warriors. Just so I can get a sense of who is in my audience today, who is a military member or former military member? By show of hands, about at least half. Okay. Anybody from the Coast Guard? I ask this question, I never get a hand. Nope, okay, I don't know where all the Coast Guard, they're not here. Guard and Reserve or retired? Okay, all right. Well, I'll warn you, it's my habit to use the term soldier. So I want to be inclusive and try to use the word service member, but that's my habit. As being an Army person, I tend to think of that word first. I recognize that all of our stories are unique. My story is just one among all of your stories, and it's just simply my truth. We each have our own, and we each have to own that for ourselves. And part of the process of me writing the book was simply finding my truth and owning it. But I believe that each of us, at some level, have a piece of common ground, and hopefully some of the stories I tell will touch that. People usually ask me to sum my book up in a sentence. This is a very difficult thing for me to do. It's mostly a woman's soldier's story, but I decided for today that I would write a poem that might sum it up a little bit. So I will start with that first. I am a soldier. I am a woman. I walk into a veteran event. Someone says, "How can I help you?" "I'm a veteran," I reply. "You are," that someone says with surprise. "I am. I'm almost unsure myself." "Well, you don't look like," that someone defends. And so my mind begins. I don't look like a tough guy, a buzz cut, rippling pectorals and bulging biceps, but I am rough and I am strong. You don't look like a tomboy, a lesbian, like one of the guys, but I am hardy and I do belong. I don't look like I step out in combat boots instead of stilettos, coated in flannel instead of silk, gnawing spicy deer jerky instead of a brownie called death by chocolate. I don't look like one of those women that wears boxer briefs. What would I do with the flap in the front anyway? I don't look pathetic and problematic, but practical and pragmatic. I don't look like one of those, you know, the ones with MST, PTSD, PMS, a man-hater, a whistleblower, a love 'em and hate 'em and ruin your career kind of woman. All the time I hear, you don't look like. Why is that important? What inner secrets can my appearance impart? None. And so I say, let me show you what you cannot see. Take a walk inside, go deeper than my shell into the workings that are me. I have few limits, almost no filters. Take risks with stereotypes of what man and woman should be. Instead, I simply do everything I was designed to do. I dress like Barbie and Ken. It depends on my mood, my destination. My style is uninhibited, unable to be defined by a brand, a store section, or a color scheme. I know my tastes, my talents. They don't fit a mold, not even my own. I dare not be contained. I stretch the boundaries. I resist being caged. I am ever expanding and conquering new ground within myself. I care for others, usually better than I care for myself. I am loyal and dutiful and have been hurt deeply because I have given freely and loved without regret. I do not hate men, but I despise criminals and abhor misogynist speak. I still believe in telling the truth with or without a whistle. I am not anyone. I am only me. I am not a look, a degree, a rank, an idea, or an ideal. I am a soldier, a veteran, a woman. Now you know, so now you can see. Thank you. I'd like to share a little bit of my Army background before I talk a little bit about my book. My first Army chaplain was a Pentecostal preacher, so I have learned to both insert "huh" and "amen" into lots of sentences. Please feel free to do that if you hear a unit or a training exercise or a something. Don't be afraid to give me a "huh" or a shout out. That won't bother me at all. I dropped out of high school in 1994. I turned 18 a few months later and joined the Army. It was kind of my get out of town, get money for school plan. I did my basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Anybody? Fort Lee, Virginia was my supply clerk training school, and my first duty station was Fort Polk, Louisiana. I was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 2nd Air Defense Artillery. They were an Avenger unit, and I'm not sure they are even in the active Army inventory anymore. It was a Humvee that had a rotating turret. It shot 8 Stinger missiles and a 50 cal. The unit had just opened the non-combatant jobs to women. And so the admin clerk, the motor supply clerk, the mechanic, the cook, and me, we were the handful of women in a battery of about 100 men. We were the only brigade in the 18th Airborne Corps that was stationed outside Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So we had the same physical fitness and annual certification training standards, which included the 2 minutes of push-ups, 2 minutes of sit-ups, a 2-mile run, and also a 4-mile run and a 12.5-mile road march with a 50-pound pack. I got quite an education on social norms and acceptable sexuality in those first 3 years, being 18 to 21, and I became more gender conscious than I'd ever been before. The camouflage did not conceal my gender, and it did not prevent sexual harassment. It seemed that a good majority of the male soldiers I served with felt like they knew some secret about me that even I didn't know, that I was supposed to be frail or weak, sensitive, emotional, or fearful. And because of that, I needed their physical protection and their sexual validation. Now, I worked my ass off. I did about, don't ask me to do it today, about 63 push-ups, 78 sit-ups, and I ran the 2 miles in about 15 minutes. But it never felt good enough. I couldn't earn membership into the Brotherhood through my physical fitness or my hard work. The best I could be was a sister, and that was something entirely different. The Army culture of the 90s perpetuated the idea that the word man no more implied woman than the word soldier did. He did not mean she. She was not equal to he. And these language subtleties had powerful meaning. How many times has a male soldier addressed a co-ed group of service members as guys? How many of those times did the women in the group answer without even thinking about it? If men were addressed in the same way, ladies, girls, gals, could I even get away with that? Hell no. No man wanted to be called a lady, a girl, a woman, or a female because in the culture, those words implied those secrets they were trying to impart. The secret that a woman was frail, weak, sensitive, emotional, and fearful. Think about it. What's a first-rate insult for a man? So even though I'm not a guy, I should have aspired to be, I was told. It was an honorary title, a promotion from the female gender. The expectation for me was to strive to be one of the guys. I needed to train like a man. And I did, beside men, leaping over every hurdle placed in front of me. I passed them on the tracks. I exceeded the expectations. Everything the Army said a soldier did, I did. I was a go at every station. I was a qualifier. But as a female soldier, I always felt unequal, inadequate, overlooked, and underestimated. I could never be a good soldier. Good soldiers were men. But you know what? Because I couldn't win that battle didn't mean that I couldn't fight. I may have been a first in a way in my unit in that decade, but it was so much easier for me, I imagine, than it was for the women that blazed that trail a century before me. When I enlisted in the Army, I was joining a community of 2 million American women veterans. 2 million. 15% of the military force population, 15,000 veterans which reside in the state of Iowa. In the early 1900s, women worked only as nurses in separate service branches, the Women's Army Corps, the Women's Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Services, the Women's Air Force, the Women Marines. And it wasn't until 1978 that women were integrated into their respective services. Though serving within the same branch as men, the 1980s and 90s were riddled with rules that excluded women from certain jobs related to direct combat or front lines. But during these relatively peaceful decades, women climbed the ranks. They took command and they completed coveted training. In 1978, Margaret A. Brewer was promoted to general. In 1981, Michelle D. Johnson became Cadet Wing Commander at the U.S. Air Force Academy. And in 1996, Heather Johnson guarded the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Women deployed in support of Operation Desert Storm, totaling 41,000. And in the last decade in the Middle East, women have deployed to the number of about 283,000. I completed my active duty enlistment in 1998 and joined the Iowa National Guard, the Detachment 1, 2168 Transportation Company in Cedar Rapids, while I started my journalism degree here at Iowa State. I did annual summer trainings at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, an NTC rotation at Fort Irwin, California, and completed 2 week-long convoy missions to California and Texas. Through on-the-job training, I was awarded the secondary job as a truck driver and drove a 5-ton or a tractor trailer with a 20 or 30-foot flatbed. I also worked 2 summers for the Camp Dodge Counter-Drug Program for Starbase, a science summer camp for 5th and 6th graders. In 2001, after September 11th, I was mobilized for 6 months to be a gate guard at Camp Dodge. And in 2003, while I was a senior here, with my last semester in front of me, I was mobilized for 14 months to Iraq. My unit was based at Al-Assad, which was an Iraqi Air Force base in northwestern Iraq. It was the headquarters of the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment from Fort Carson, Colorado, which was the unit my transportation company was supporting. The 3rd ACR was responsible for the security operations of the entire northwest quadrant of the country. So from Baghdad, which is about central Iraq, north to Kirkuk near the Turkish border, and west to the forward operating bases on Jordan and Syrian borders is the territory that I drove convoys. I stayed several days, sometimes 2 weeks at a time, at these forward operating bases, to include Fallujah and Ramadi, transporting everything from ammo, mail, repair parts, enemy prisoners being relocated to Abu Ghraib, new Iraqi border policemen moving from the training center at Al-Assad to the border checkpoints and police stations, troops coming to Al-Assad for MWR so they could use the PX and the phone center, because in that first year after the invasion there was no internet and there was no Skype and there was no phone service at most of the bases. I pulled security for infantry night patrols, for raids, for civil affairs missions at elementary schools and at an Iraqi bank in Ramadi. And all of these missions I never envisioned. My convoys were fired upon and hit IEDs. I lost 2 friends, and 2 were disabled. In the 3rd ACR that year, there were 50 casualties. In the last decade of war, there have been 800 service members wounded and 130 killed. So I was surprised earlier this year when Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Martin Dempsey rescinded the 1994 rule that barred women from being assigned to combat units. Technically, I was attached, not assigned, but it's obvious to us all that the difference in the term made no difference on the battlefield. The combat exclusion policy had one major flaw. It didn't keep women out of combat. Modern-day warfare has a nonlinear battlefield. There are no front lines. There are no safe zones. Suicide bombers and IEDs detonate everywhere. This May 15th, the tables will turn. The assumption will be that if a woman can pass the job qualifications, she can now serve in one of 200,000 jobs in the military that were previously closed based on gender only. And in a recent Gallup poll, 74% of adults agreed to lift the restrictions on the military that were based only on either gender or sexuality. It is an American axiom to give every citizen the chance to be her or his best. And it's my belief that military service is not just a rite of passage into manhood. It is the very embodiment of citizenship. When a soldier signs their contract, they pledge to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, bearing true faith and allegiance, so help us God. And I think we did so voluntarily. We had immediate reasons like education benefits, income or travel or adventure, but I think we also shared a belief at the bedrock of our being that military service was simply something to be proud of, and that there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. We were aware that the liberties, luxuries, and opportunities we enjoy are unfathomable by most of the world's people, and so we were able to contribute to this through our sacrifice. The sacrifice continues after you take off your uniform. I wanted it to be uplifting and inspiring, but it wouldn't be fair if I didn't look at the present challenges in the military and some of the future problems that we need to address. There are some very real and present issues: MST, PTSD, disabilities that are physical and invisible, and suicide. I'll touch on each just briefly, knowing that the impact is tremendous for soldiers that are reintegrating and transitioning back into civilian life. MST. It's the term we use for military sexual trauma, and there's a lot of media attention on this right now. Here are a few facts from SWAN, the Service Women's Action Network. In 2010, 19,000 sexual assaults were reported. The Department of Defense estimates that these 19,000 reports are about 13% of actual assaults committed. This makes the actual number of incidents estimated at 127,154 in a single year. Less than 8% of reported cases went to trial, and 1 out of 3 convicted military sex offenders continue to serve. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, up to 20% of service members deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan have PTSD. And there is a possible link between PTSD and suicide. About 4% of male service members have committed suicide, 2% of female service members. That's 33 attempts a day, and 22 that die from the attempt. When I came home from Iraq, my enlistment was complete, and I decided that my time in the military was over, at least as a soldier. That same year, I graduated from Iowa State, but I struggled to reintegrate with my invisible injuries. I didn't want to be in the military, but I still knew I needed to serve somehow. And I knew that a part of the healing process was moving my persona from victim to survivor to advocate. And my passion to make the good out of bad, so to speak, brought me back here, where I met Jathan. Never before had I met someone so enthusiastic about a mission to serve veterans. And so I really just want to say thank you for making this a community an inclusive community for all veterans of both genders and all religious affiliations and all abilities. Doing that is helping us to create a space where we can take care of ourselves. Besides attending and supporting veteran events, I turned to writing. At the University of Iowa this last weekend, I had the chance to see how journaling and poetry and painting and music and a number of arts allowed veterans a medium to express themselves, to share their story, to create something beautiful, a permanent document of their reflection on one experience at one particular time in their life. I am a big proponent of these types of programs. I attended the University of Iowa Veterans Writers Workshop in 2010, and that's where my book started. So when I was invited to come back this year, 3 years later, to teach a class, I really couldn't have been more excited. My book is called All I Could Be, My Story as a Woman Warrior in Iraq. I wish it were out right now, but it should be out in about a week or two. I want to open the floor up to questions and comments. Please introduce yourself. Please feel free to express anything you like.
Well, first off, thank you. My name is Katrina Hardin-Williams, and I'm serving currently as an academic advisor in aerospace engineering.
Okay.
So this question is, what wisdom would you give to the ISU faculty, staff, and students when we encounter women who respond readily and rapidly to the call to military service while enrolled in classes during a specific semester?
As far as they're transitioning out into a deployment or coming back?
Both.
Okay. I was very fortunate that there was a great group of people here, including my former faculty advisor, Barbara Mack, to take care of me in the transition away from the university and then coming back in. There aren't a lot of secrets, but I can tell you that the greatest gift that everyone gave me was a little bit of time and space, and they sure listened a lot. I mean, I would come into the office with a project that I was really struggling with, and I don't know that I knew why I was struggling with it, but I got the sense that they did. So I did get a little extra time. And I did get a chance to just start telling that story when it was fresh in my mind. So not everyone will probably be ready to talk about certain things, but when they are, that's a great gift. Because there are very few places that you can talk about some of those issues without being judged. I don't know if that's very helpful, but that's what I would say.
There are some countries that require military service of all citizens for a certain number of years. It's been said in our country that military service falls on people in disproportionate percentages, on minorities and those of lower socioeconomic status more heavily. Do you think having a policy where everyone is encouraged to serve would be helpful?
I think it would change the decision making in the country, absolutely. Absolutely. Right now, about 1% of the population is serving. And so for some of those groups of people, they have spent 5 of the last 10 years deployed. So part of the, I don't want to say responsibility of a veteran, but one thing that's helpful if someone wants to tell their story is they have the burden to educate the other 99% of the population, and that task is huge. And I don't think we can make very good decisions about war, about deployments, if people don't have the information. I think we take for granted that because we have such a prolific media that we really know what's going on out there. And one thing I'm surprised when I talk to people about some of the more particular incidents in my story is most people say, I wouldn't have guessed that. I didn't know that. How can that be? I think when we have all the facts, I think our decisions change. Absolutely.
Miyoko, can you tell us a little bit more about bringing your book to publication? What was that like for you? Just a little bit of that.
Once I had a full manuscript, which took about a year, I got an editing coach, and I worked on it for about another 6 months. And then I kind of got educated in the publishing world. And it is a little war in and of itself. It's very difficult to negotiate, and everyone's experience is a little different. So when people ask me about publishing a book that they might have, that's hard advice to give because it's very unusual. I was actually working for a marketing company. I ran into somebody who worked at a radio station, who knew somebody who was a book reviewer. And they were interested in my story, just in the conversation that we worked together. And he said, why don't you send it to me, and I'll send it to my friend. And it really was just like that. In 2 days, I got a phone call from a publisher. So I didn't go through the traditional route of querying a lot of, I never had a literary agent. So that was something that, but in the process of getting to a full manuscript, that was at least 1.5 years ago. And this coming out now, even 2 weeks late, is actually pretty fast. I signed a contract last August. And so it coming out this soon is actually fairly unusual.
Could you speak a little bit to the counseling that soldiers receive when they come back and what you think should be done either to, whether it's mandatory counseling, more counseling, and how that would be received by the soldiers who are returning?
When I got to Kuwait, they had just opened up a Baskin-Robbins shack. And I thought this was incredible. I'm going to go get ice cream, and it's 125 degrees out here, and it took about 2 generators to run this thing. I go get my ice cream, and I hear a shot. And I think, hey, I just got used to the silence around here. We're in Kuwait. What the hell is going on? A soldier returning for a second deployment killed themselves on the way in. The exit counseling that I got was something like this, and I know they've improved it. But in 2004, I was asked, do you have suicidal thoughts? Did you see a dead body? And everyone said, if you want to go home, check this, this, and this. And that's what I did. Because I really believed at the time that the best way I was going to get better was to get the hell out of there. I wasn't going to stay over at some Army post and answer a lot of questions. And I think it's an interesting idea that they want to screen people right away, but you don't even know how to answer those questions right away. So that wasn't the best tool. I think sometime after getting a chance to reunite with your family and reintegrate back into a different schedule, the problem with suicide for Guard and reservists is that the network is gone. So if you return to an active duty post, follow-up counseling is available. And so is the same group of people that shared that experience with you, so you get a chance to talk to them. So you don't lose everything right away. It was actually a little bit scary getting on the bus from Fort McCoy and going back to the armory, because even though at that point we all kind of hated each other, we were done, we were ready to go home, nobody really knew what they were going to do without each other either. So once we went back, I came back to school, people went back to their jobs. There was no real follow-up, especially if you got out. If you stayed in, you would have once a month at your armory where you might have someone check up on you. But if you got out, there's no follow-up. And I think that was the greatest disservice, because at some point in time, weeks, months, years later, that's when you start to have a real, once you let your guard down and you start to really think about what that experience was in a real way, I think things change a lot.
I'll take this opportunity. If you have any other questions, we still have time for it. But just take this opportunity to thank Miyoko again. If we can give her a round of applause. We're not done yet, so we have more time for questions. But I thought I'd take this opportunity just to thank the Margaret Sloss Women's Center for helping promote this event, and of course Pat Miller and the Lectures Series for helping promote this, and the Memorial Union. At this time, I just wanted to interrupt here a little bit, and I have a lot of respect and appreciation for you, Miyoko, and to be up here and to share your story and to help the dialogue. And for all of you that are here, it's so important that you're a part of this discussion. I think the most important thing we can do is create opportunities for greater dialogue in ways that might create deeper empathy and understanding for the sacrifice that not only veterans make, but their family members as well. I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with a plaque, Miyoko. It's something very simple as a gesture of our gratitude, and I'll go ahead and read it here. Iowa State University Veterans Center hereby recognizes Miyoko Ikiji in gratitude and appreciation for your talents and gifts, which inspire us to share our own stories, moving us towards a greater collective understanding of the sacrifices and services that veterans and their families make for each of us as a society. Thank you for your service and your continued leadership.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, if there are any other questions, please feel free. We have a few more minutes. Do you still want to entertain questions? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
And at the end of this here, if you want to stick around, I'm sure that Miyoko would be happy to have some further conversations. We had hoped that her book would be here. It's not. If you'd like to know, we're going to invite Miyoko back to the university for a book signing. So if you want to know when that would be, just connect with me. You can send me an email, and I'll let you know when that's going to be. But are there any other questions? Okay.
If you'd like, I'll read a short passage from the book.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Do you know if the book's going to be sold at the university bookstore? It is?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
To give me a minute, I didn't put a bookmarker in it. I wasn't sure exactly what piece I was going to read today. But I want to read a story about David Kirchhoff. He was the first casualty in Iowa for Operation Iraqi Freedom. He stood to my left in formation, so he was someone that I got quite accustomed to seeing every day. And I feel very responsible to continue to share his story and the story of Aaron Sissel also, since they aren't here to tell it. take me a minute.
I'll ask a question while she's looking.
Thank you.
Just for my own curiosity, how many of you veterans or non-veterans even come from a military family where it's, been a part of your family to serve for? Thank you.
One of the things that I explain at the beginning of my book is that life there didn't seem to happen in chronological order. So even though I came home and used most of my notes to write things in a certain scheme, it didn't make a story in the way that it did. It is nonfiction, and it maintains factual integrity, but it really was a creative endeavor because it's more a reflection on truth than it is a set of facts. And in my experience, people often acted out of character. Things didn't always make sense. And so I kind of pieced it together in a way that sometimes I forget, but I think I found it. Delaney, Mason, John, and I entered the former Iraqi theater, now serving as a chapel. We picked up memorial programs that Marlis and I had written from a table in the back and found seats near the front. It was quiet. Everyone off mission was there, and Kirkhart deserved that, our acknowledgement that he had made the ultimate sacrifice. I opened the program and I read it again. He was born in 1972. He enlisted less than a year before being deployed. He left behind his wife, 2 sons, ages 11 and 12, and 3 stepdaughters. There was a quote from his father, who said, "David was a very brave young man, serving his country. He died doing what he loved. His mother and I and our family are very proud of him." The lieutenant pushed play on the CD player that sat on a chair at the edge of the stage, and the first notes of the national anthem surged forth. He turned up the volume, and the rocket's red glare screamed from the small speakers. Home of the Brave ended in a loud crackle when LT hit the stop button. The commander, the platoon sergeant, paid tribute. Then Delaney, Kirkhart's closest friend, took the stage. His speech was unscripted, sincere, and everything decent. The lieutenant sang Amazing Grace, an unexpected gesture that was surprisingly beautiful. The chaplain led us in prayer. Then First Sergeant did the ceremonial roll call. Staff Sergeant George, "Here, First Sergeant," he said, standing up, then taking his seat again. Specialist Delaney, the First Sergeant called. "Here, First Sergeant," he said, standing. PFC Kirkhart. Silence. PFC Kirkhart. Silence. Private First Class David Kirkhart. Crack. The first round of the firing the volley shattered the bitter quiet, and tears ran down my cheeks. Crack. They fired again. I swallowed a painful lump. Crack. The lonesome melody of taps wafted in around us. The service was over. People stood and stared at the display of his weapon, his boots, his helmet, and dog tags a moment before filing out of the theater. There were guard towers to climb, vehicles to prep for missions, weapons to clean, clothes to wash, jokes to tell, lives to live. And as we shuffled out, it occurred to me, he was 31, a short life, young kids. We couldn't drink to him, so we smoked in silence instead. Mason didn't even smoke, but it didn't matter. We were in it together, all of it. When I got back to the barracks, I decided to write his folks a letter. I didn't really know what to say. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Kirkhart, I'm sorry to write you on this sad occasion. I send you my sympathies and prayers for your strength and healing. We all share in your pain and loss. David and I met in Cedar Rapids just prior to the deployment. He was quiet but always friendly to me. We were in the same squad. He stood to my left. He liked hard candies. He always had a pocket full. And in formation, he always offered me my favorite, a strawberry cream saver. This small act of kindness gave me a reason to smile every day. While at Fort McCoy, we were given a one-weekend pass. When Brooke came to pick David up, on their way back, they dropped me off to get a rental car. I offered to pay him gas money, but he wouldn't accept it. His family was the most important part of his life. It was apparent how deeply he cared for his wife. So helping me to be with the one I loved for that weekend was not something I could really pay him for. He understood. Had I gotten to know David better, I'm certain I would have found out what you long knew. These little acts of kindness were very much a part of his character and his way of life. Anyway, I wanted you to know David touched the lives of many people you will never know or meet. All of 1st Platoon will never forget your son, Specialist Hikiji. Everyone was out on mission. John, the rest of the battle team, Di, and the other gals from my room, everyone except for Bev. The two of us decided to keep busy cleaning up. I grabbed a broom, and Bev started straightening the other gals' beds. She made a tight bed with vigor and care. In fact, she did most everything that way. Bev was over 40. She was the oldest female in the platoon, and she was something like a den mother to us. She tended to wake us up to eat breakfast, whether we were on or off mission, whether we wanted to or not. And she enforced lights out, 2200. She was short and stocky and wore a tight haircut of blonde curls. Back home, she was a prison guard at the state's penitentiary, so we nicknamed her the warden. I'd seen her take Blake's foolish ass down to the concrete in a second after he'd razzed her too much. She found her sanity in order and routine. She was patriotic without fail, tough as nails but not insensitive, and I admired her for that. She moved boots and shower shoes to the doorway as I swept under bunks and crooked plywood shelving, pushing out piles of sand and dust bunnies. On my final sweep around, my broom found a piece of paper. I picked it up. Seeing what it was, I folded it and sat back down. "What?" Bev said. "What is it?" I unfolded it for her to see. "Oh, God," she said, when she drew near enough to read the signature. "What should we do with it?" "We mail it, I guess." Bev opened her footlocker, retrieved an envelope and a pen, and as she wrote, I decided to read Kirkhart's last letter home. 12:15 p.m., June 2nd, 2003. Hi, honey. It's very hot here, 130 degrees in the afternoon, and at night it gets to around 90, and it feels good when night hits. God, I wish I could call you to hear your voice. I miss you so much. Sorry the paper's wet. Sweat. Oh, yeah, a lot of sand here, so much sand, more than I've ever seen. And yes, honey, we're 8 hours ahead of you. That's weird because by the time you're going to bed, it's like 1 o'clock here. I love you, honey. I'm lonely. But I know how much I love you, and I can't wait to come home and be with you and start our long life together. I hate this place. It's hot as fuck. Call my mom, let her know where I'm at, and when I get home, I need your name and David Jr.'s in Chinese writing. 2 new tattoos. I miss you like crazy. You'd better put a yellow ribbon on the tree for me. I'll be home in a few months. Hopefully you'll be able to get a house by the river, and if you want, you can go get a better car than what you have. Well, my love, I think of you every day. God, I love you, and I miss you, and this really sucks. I want to come home. But I'm going to end this letter. I love you forever and always. Your husband, David. P.S. Give the girls a kiss for me. Thank you.
Any last question before we cut loose? Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And again, if you would like to know when Miyoko's coming back, just let me know. She knows she always has a home here at Iowa State. And thank you, Miyoko. Go. Go. Go.